they have all different initiatives. Totally, we checked that there's about 20,000 CDE, and the unique one is 19, close to 20,000. Examples I listed here. I listed some examples because I want to show it's not like a simple concept like a smoking test. A lot of them actually very detailed description about how you do the measure. And then we look at the dimension field at Datamed right now from those 4 repositories. Actually, there's about 3,000 unique dimension names from those 4 repositories. And I also listed some examples here. And some of them actually is kind of detailed description as the CDE we found from the NLM website, like this one. Total horizon, total distance traveled as the time information. And but we looked at the overlap between the 3,000 and 20,000. If you do exact string match, only 6 are exactly the same. So it's smoking status, medical history, body weight, age, vital capacity. So that's kind of surprising. Only actually 6 of them are exactly matched. And we did a little bit sort of look into the data. And I'm showing some example here. So just to see what are the issues when you're trying to map what we found in the actual variables in the repository versus in the CDE definition. So the first one is axial length, right eye, but the other one doesn't have the comma, so it's like more like a word orders or commas or things. Those are few actually. On the CDE, usually they have like a measurement at the end or value, which is actually also quite easy to match. But some of them actually is quite different. And we noticed, so based on what we did on this little exercise, is like a many data sets actually right now, they don't use CDE at this time. And some CDEs actually really from my understanding on the terminology side is it's not a single concept like you do normal CT or whatever. It's really a combination with multiple concepts in kind of some kind of condition to define a measurement. And if you look at what we have about the dimension or variables versus CDE, they actually often may happen at a different granularity level. Because one of them may be more specific. And I'll show you some examples of mismatch we have done. And synonyms of abbreviation is also an issue. So this is what we did a little bit prototype in the Datamed, trying to enable the search of CDE. What we did actually was we did a very simple sort of NLP-based CDE encoding service. This is the sort of component we developed. So dimension field goes through this. We will map whatever we think it can be mapped to the CDE identifier. Find them and label with the identifier. And when the query comes in, the same component actually applies to the query. We decide if it can map to the CDE identifier or not. If it can map to CDE identifier, actually we assign more weight to the CDE identifier when you do the search. Otherwise, it goes through the default keyword search. So against this CDE enriched index, and you come up with the result. I'll show you a little bit of what we have right now. But I still want to show some. So right now we just did a simple, like a similarity-based using the vector space model to calculate the dimension variable with the CDE. And the algorithm is simple. Some of them actually fine, like those a few examples I showed you, like a cross rate with cross rate value. Those are okay. But if you just do the simple, like a string similarity match, but you see those arrows, this is talking about non-HDL cluster, but this one is talking about HDL cluster. So it's actually, and this one, it's like body weight at something, but this is a dissection was at the first. So we actually thought those two are similar ones, but actually it turns out if you find that, that's not what you want. And so I see there's a lot of room for improvement for this kind of NLP approach or to do the mapping. We can find out we can parse this out like to see this is the main concept, body weight, and those are the modified and put different weights on the. So there's a lot of room for improvement for developing the mapping algorithm. And but we also think if there's something like this can really be developed with really good performance, it can be actually applied to many other applications. So okay, I just show you what we have. It's actually very simple. So this is actually even not the like a public Datamed that it's the beta version for our development. And if I type we're actually now going to search the dimension field, and we're actually going to propose prompt on, say, if you're really looking at this CDE value right now. And if you go to, this is just on the regular search. If you go to advanced search, then you actually can, from here, you select, say, I might actually go, oops. Great. It's on Chrome, right? Trying to find the mouse. Okay, where did it go? I'll move, scroll down a little bit. Once you get used to Mac, it's different on the PC. I couldn't figure out anymore. But all I want to say is actually in this drop-down, you can select, we have a new field. Before we only have those, but now we have a new dimension field. You can actually select the dimension field and type something you want to search. Oh, yeah. Okay. So basically it will show, actually it's searching the dimension field for body weight, and it shows the result. If you click single one, you can see actually in the dimension field of the that. Yeah. So this is how the variables were recorded in the dimension field, and you see one of the names about body weight. So this is very simple, like a search for the CDE, for the dimension field in the that's all I have.
Hi, this is Denise. Can you hear me on the phone?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just had a question. I think this is very, very interesting, and I think the language that we use when we talk about all this is, I think, reflects in some ways how we view things. And so I'm curious. You chose the term dimension here, as opposed to variable or field or data element. Is there any? Was there some? I would imagine each of the those kinds of labels you thought about. So can you help us, give us some insight into the use of that word dimension from your perspective as more appropriate than any of the other labels you might have chosen?
Okay. Alejandro, do you want to respond?
Okay, and then Philippe, if you want to add something. So we had lots of discussions about these labels, actually, and we thought that the term variable was a bit overloaded. So we decided to go through dimensions, thinking about, for example, data cubes and thinking about how the data could be structured. And we thought that dimension reflected what we wanted to express about the data set, being these measurements or observations that are associated with the data set. Again, it was more about moving away of variables that is interpreted differently in different domains, like statistics or researchers, and thinking about a new term that we thought it would be clear, but we will see if that's the case or not. I mean, we are happy to hear feedback on that too.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Again, I think the perspective you're saying was you were looking at it from the data set perspective and recognizing that sometimes you'll have data cubes and things. I think that's useful for us to consider because typically I think this term we've all been using, CDE, arose from looking at like paper forms, for example, and the question on the form, and just a whole different perspective on how this information is going to be used. And so a gentleman earlier commented on how the research community really doesn't like the idea of data elements, especially common data elements, right? And so I'm hoping today we can learn more from the research perspective about how they view this type of metadata and its role in helping researchers interpret data. So thanks for taking a minute to explain that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Lee? Yeah.
Can you do a few more words about what the NLP strategy was that you were using and what was behind that? Yesterday you talked about, sorry, you could talk a little bit about the NLP strategy. Yesterday you talked about using MetaMap Lite, and the question is
for this one, for the CDE mapping, right now it's very simple, just based on vector space model to calculate cosine similarity between two streams. That's all we did. It's just to calculate it. Then we decide a cutoff. If it's have a high score, we decide that map to CD. If not, we decide just not mapping. And what I talked yesterday is about the NLP server for extract the concept from the query. For example, we will extract the body weight as a concept and map to an ID in the terminology server. We use MetaMap. We use our formally groomed machine learning based approach to do all those. So we actually haven't applied any sophisticated NLP approach here yet. So there is a way, for example, I can recognize all those concepts within the long CDE. One is about disease, and there's a body location modifier, there's tempo modifier. Then you can, along with the terminology, to calculate semantic distance about those, or even use your deep learning things to, based on the big corpus, to calculate the semantic distance. Then you make the decision. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and right now it's very simple strategy.
I think it's an interesting strategy that you're talking about from the outset, because I think one of the challenges with building a repository, and I defer to those who are actually building the repositories to confirm or deny this, but the challenge is to come up with the sweet spot between what you desperately want to know, your community thinks they want to know, and what you can actually afford from an operational perspective to maintain over time. And I think the idea of finding a mechanism that would allow you to self-curate, in essence, is really powerful. And so I think that's part of the discussion that we're going to be having here about this tension between what has to be provided in a granular sort of way and what a system could ultimately provide through.
I think that's actually important to know what's the effort to reach like a really acceptable performance, right, for the mapping, and how much effort really need to spend. Can we actually do it better when they actually define CDE and make it more clear or follow more ontology-based approach, like things like this from CEDA.
Thanks. I just want to mention in this context that the NLP approach is really difficult, but an alternative approach is to actually have the CDE identifiers in the metadata, and DAS is set up in such a way that every entity can have identifiers. So we could have those, but that puts the problem on a different player, because then the data producers have to provide the identifiers. So we've got two different strategies, both of which have problems associated. Thanks, Mark.
So just on that point, George, about having the identifiers in the data. I mean, I think with what we're trying to do here, there are examples that we can pick on where we know that kind of thing exists. And I can point to data sets that are in Datamed now where we actually know that. And rather than trying to change the world right away, where we've got those kinds of examples, I think we need to be looking for the opportunities where we can use them. So for the Cancer Genome Atlas, the CDE IDs and CADSR are there in the XML files, which define what the CDEs that are recorded in those data sets are. And I hope what we can look for in the prototype is ways to explore that. And I hope that part of our discussions today is around looking for those kinds of opportunities, because then we can show examples where it works, and then if others want to follow those examples, then they can do so. But rather than trying to set out and say, let's set these rules and have the world, and force the world to adhere to them, rather than dangle a carrot out there which shows what's possible.
Great point.